Hello everybody, and welcome to my first of, well, my only video on this, the Taron Vic, which has a red tag. Red tags are bad. No shutter action. Yes, I know that there is a school of thought that when on the occasions when I use a camera which is not fully functional for one of these videos, that it is a problem for the camera manual. I will note that sometimes it's also very helpful to see what a failing or failed camera looks like, so that it's easy to recognize the symptoms of that and understand that what is a camera problem, a mechanical or other camera problem, versus a user issue. So let me just take this off of here, just so it's not in the way. Oh, that is so greasy. I will say one thing about this specific camera is somebody, not I, attempted a repair on it already. And it appears that not all of the components are in here. Judging by the way the viewfinder looks, that is. Anyway, let's get into this camera. This is a Taron Vic. This is a rangefinder camera, and it's a 35mm rangefinder camera with a selenium scene meter. So when you see a meter like this, which has these different little bubble wrap looking things on it, that tells you it's a selenium cell meter. It has a leaf shutter, and it has shutter speeds of bulb plus 1/30th through 1/250th. So not a very large range of shutter speeds, and the flash syncs at any speed. Now, the target market for this camera is what we would call today the amateur to advanced amateurs, most likely advanced amateurs on a budget. So the reason for that is that it's very well built. Tarons were well-made cameras with some mechanical Achilles heels, but from a construction quality standpoint, they were good. It has a serviceable lens, though not fast. It's a 45mm f2, and it likely would have been inexpensive, as many of these types of cameras with lenses of this spec were inexpensive. And we also know that because of the limited shutter range and the relatively slow 45mm lens, at a time when many of the high-end rangefinders were coming with 1.7 and 1.4 45mm lenses. Not a whole lot of information about Taron cameras, or Taron, however it's pronounced, exists online, at least compared to many of the other makers. So there's going to be some absent background detail in this video, but I will say Taron made a lot of cameras for other brands. So the Amica iLux video I released a few years ago, that was a Taron. And there are a number of other brands, house brands in the UK as well as in America, that were actually made by Taron. That also includes some of the tower cameras. This was made by KK Taron personally, like he made it. No, KK is, I don't remember what it stands for. It's an abbreviation in Japanese for, I don't remember. Anyway, it was made by KK Taron in Japan from 1962 until no one actually knows when these went out of production. My guess, given the production cycle of off-brand rangefinders in the 60s, is that this would have been only produced for a few years, maybe 3 at most. I'd be shocked if it was produced for more than that. I have no idea what it was preceded by. The Taron family tree is not existent online that I've ever found. But it was possible that this superseded the VL. And it was concurrent with, again, I have no idea, because I can't even find a complete list of the cameras that Taron made, let alone a list with what years they were all produced in. My suspicion is that Taron only made 1, maybe 2 models at a time, because I don't think they were that big of a company. And it was followed by, again, no idea, maybe the Marquis. That's the best I've got for you. So honestly, it would be really awesome if somebody got the Taron itch and sat down and did some really detailed research about their camera line, because they are one of those really interesting niche cameras that does have a very small but dedicated cult following. So if you have your Taron Vic, let's take a look at all of the different features and functions and buttons on it and talk about what they are. And later in the video, we'll talk about what they do. So we're going to start here on the top. This is the film rewind knob and lever, and this is what we will use to rewind the film, but not open up the film back. Lifting this does. If you can open up the film back by lifting this up, there's something even more seriously wrong with your camera than this one's problems. Taron Vic, cold shoe with serial number, shutter release button, film advance lever, frame count dial right here, which is manually reset by turning it counterclockwise. And the index, is there an index? There's kind of like a little groove right there. I guess you just pick the index yourself? Maybe it's that groove that is right at the top of the thing there, so that must be the frame count index. Okay, camera front, selenium light meter, view rangefinder window, viewfinder window. So when you look through the viewfinder to sight up your scene, you'll be looking through here. When you are focusing with the rangefinder, the range-finding light comes through this window, bounces off some internal mirrors. That's how the focusing system works. Flash PC port. This is your lens right here. Now on the lens, we have the focusing helical right here. Okay, from infinity down to 0.8 meters or 2.6 feet, which is good for a range, well, standard for a rangefinder. Here, let's see, we've got the aperture dial here on this part, and this is a funky interface. There we go. So we're going to rotate the aperture dial. Over here we have the shutter speed selector from bulb up to 1/250th of a second. Then here on the bottom we have the film ASA selector. ASA is the same as ISO, so goes all the way from 10 ASA, which would be 10 ISO, up to 800 ASA, which is 800 ISO. So a really good range given the limitations of the aperture and shutter speed. All right, so I'm going to show you really quickly with this, with the aperture ring. There's a little notch right there, which you should be able to see. I'm going to pull this lever toward the camera body and rotate the ring just until it engages with that notch. Okay, now what that's going to do is that's going to couple your aperture and shutter speed. What do I mean by that? Okay, so if we're at f5.6, shutter speed is at 1/60th. If we advance it to 1/125th, the aperture also adjusts in the wrong way. If we're going to go to a faster shutter speed, why is that going to a smaller aperture? That makes exactly 0 sense. That's not EV linked. I have no idea why it does that. That is a stumper. That should be the opposite direction. At any rate, how do I recover from this? That was embarrassing. All right, let's look on the camera side. Film back release right here, which opens the film back. On the camera's back, we have the viewfinder window right here. On the camera's bottom, we have the tripod socket and the film rewind button. Now, of course, as we just saw, to get into the back of the camera, we lift up this release, and now we are inside of the camera. Here's the film cassette chamber where the film will go when you load it to take pictures. These silver rails are film guide rails, and when the film is in here, the ones on the top and bottom keep the film from moving up and down, which ensures that the images are properly spaced. And then these ones on the inside, which you can see through the sprocket holes right there, are used to keep the film flat on plane. They're slightly recessed from these outer ones, and when the film back closes, the film pressure plate right here sandwiches the film there to keep it flat. This is the film take-up spool, which keeps the film from moving backwards through the camera, and also helps to guide it smoothly and evenly through the camera. Film take-up spool right here. That's film guide sprocket. I called that the wrong thing. This little metal shape right here, which is not a roller, puts some pressure on the film right here to help ensure that these sprocket holes engage, sprocket teeth engage with the film sprocket holes. Film pressure plate, and then there's a little spring right here, which is used to keep the film cassette properly aligned in the cassette chamber. While we've got the film back open, because this camera doesn't take a battery, we don't need to load a battery in it, we're going to load the film immediately. Drop it in like that, push the rewind post into place. You can at this point or later take out any tension. I did it right now, or take out any slack. Pull out a little bit of a leader. Next we're going to look for that little slot right there. Gonna slide the leader into that slot. There we go. That's actually way more than is really needed. To advance it, I could have gotten away with one fewer frames. Then we close the back. Now we have a 24 exposure roll, but what we're going to do is we're going to set this to 1 notch before start. Well, I should have set that to 2, but we're going to set it to 1 notch before start. Oh, should actually have set it to start, because then there's 2 exposures between start and the first exposure. Interestingly, this is advancing 2 frames on the counter every time I advance the film. It is not supposed to do that. So at any rate, you would advance 3 frames and then you would get to frame number 1. And now you're ready to start taking photos. Now, if you noticed over here, I'm going to flip that out so it's easier to see. The film rewind knob, after you take a photo and when you advance the film, turns in the direction that the film's taken off, opposite of the arrow there. And if it's turning, you know that your film's being taken through the camera and you are going to be actually getting photos. Now, hopefully you would not get photos with this camera, obviously, because it doesn't work. Film is one and done, so in real life what you would want to do is take all of your photos, and then when you're done taking your photos, you push this button down, and then you can start rewinding. And you have to hold this button down, by the way, on this camera model. And then you rewind it, and you rewind the film all the way into the cassette before developing it yourself or taking it to the lab. So like I said, film is one and done. It can record light on the emulsion exactly 1 time in a controlled manner with a proper shutter speed and aperture, or an uncontrolled manner like this, where all of the photons available hit the light and completely ruin it. So if you open up your camera's back while the film is all the way over here, you're not going to see any images ever from this film. They will all be erased. If you pull your film out of the cassette before loading it, you also won't see any images because the film won't be able to take them. But I want you to see what's going on inside of the camera when you advance your film. So after you hit the shutter button, you advance the film, and you can see that the film that's in here, which is good, is being pulled out and across the back of the camera, taken up on the take-up spool. There we go. And that is how it works. One of the things I do enjoy, admittedly, about using cameras that are at the end of their life for this video is that they get to do one last thing, but for the good of the cause before they go on to become either a parts camera or get recycled, depending on them. This one is going to have its lens removed, and then the body will end up getting recycled. So at any rate, and then once you are done taking taking all of your photos, you hold the film rewind button down and then you rewind, and you just rewind the film back into the cassette like this. And that's how you take all your photos and then rewind it to send your film off to the lab or develop it yourself. Now, in real life, you would want to rewind it so that this leader goes entirely into the camera. I am going to reuse this film, so I'm not going to do that. If you do ever have a camera that you have trouble getting film out of, then do leave yourself a little bit of a leader. Pull out the cassette and then just manually pull in the rest of the leader until it's disappeared. And that's how you load and unload and how film works in this camera. All right, next thing let's do is talk about how to use a flash with this camera. Now, it will use any modern flash you can connect to it, but because this doesn't have any sort of metering connection to it, it is literally a basic camera. Just get the cheapest, most basic flash you can, with the caveat that your flash has to be able to connect to the PC port here with a cable. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to put your flash into the cold shoe. We'll talk about why you actually don't want to do that in a minute. But for basic use, you'll put the flash into the cold shoe here. You'll get the biggest, most obnoxious flash you can, just like that. You'll run the cable down to the PC port. And now whenever you take a picture, regardless of what the shutter speed is, as long as the flash is charged up, it will discharge when you take your photo. Okay. So the reason for that is because this has a leaf shutter. And leaf shutters have a bunch of leaves that overlap. And then when you take a picture, they all open at the same time, and then they all reclose again. Okay, just like that. Actually, it's more like they all open in the same direction and then reclose. But anyway, for concept demonstration, they open and then close. So when the leaf shutter fires, the leaves all open very quickly, same very fast speed regardless of shutter speed. When the leaves are all the way out, then the flash triggers. The light moves at the speed of light to your subject, back to your lens, illuminates your subject, you get a proper exposure. Then the leaves all close again, and you advance the film. So that's why leaf shutters allow a flash sync at any shutter speed. Okay, so some technique about using your flash. The worst place to put your flash is right on top of your camera, above your lens. And the reason for that is because if you're taking a picture of someone, you have the flash up here, the light leaves the flash, bounces up to your subject, and back down to your lens. And what's going to happen is it's going to make your subjects look flat and waxy. It's not a good look at all. And when we see anything outside under the daylight, under street lights at night, under lighting from the ceiling indoors when we're inside, we are always underneath lighting. You always want to have your lighting replicate what is natural, which is to say above us, which is what people are used to seeing. So if you have your light with your flash mimic that, then you are going to be in good shape for having more successful flash use. Now, a couple ways to do that. You can get an articulating flash that bounces the light up. Even better is an articulating rotating flash that gives you even more control. Another thing you can do is get a flash bar and mount the flash off to a side like this. And then if you're shooting in portrait mode, the flash bar allows you some articulation of the flash. But if you're shooting in portrait mode, you can then do something like that and then bounce the flash off the ceiling. That is the most basic 10-cent tour of how to use a camera flash. So I hope that helps you if that's something you're interested in doing. And then the next thing, the last part, is going to be how to use this rangefinder right here. I'm going to describe it because I don't really have a good way of placing this up to the camera lens and showing you what it actually looks like. When you look through this window right here to sight up your scene, there is a very small square in the center of it. And that small square is roughly, that's too big. That small square is roughly the size of the bottom of this film cassette. It is tiny, absolutely tiny on this camera. It's I think the smallest focusing area I've ever seen on a rangefinder, so, which would be another indication that it is a lower spec and lower end rangefinder. At any rate, when you have when you're looking through that small little area is going to have an overlay of the scene in it. And when you focus, those two overlays, one of them, well, your overlay is going to move over the scene like that. So if you are focusing on something that's 6 feet away and they are overlaid like this, you're out of focus. But if you move your lens focus and now they're overlaid like this, you have achieved proper focus. That's how the rangefinder interface works on this camera. So now that we've gone over all of that, let's go over how to take a picture with this camera. If you have one with a working selenium meter, the light meter display is in the viewfinder. I cannot tell you what that looks like. I don't think I don't have that page of the outline, but I don't think I found a manual for this camera. I think I found one for the Vic 2 or for the VC, something like that. So I don't think I even found what a picture of the viewfinder meter interface looks like. At any rate, when you have a proper meter reading, you're going to use the silver dial here to dial in your shutter speed and then your aperture as well, however you want to do it. And, oh, I know what that notch is for now. That notch is to prevent you from going into bulb mode accidentally. If you have your aperture like that, in that notch, you cannot access bulb mode. Oh, it's a bulb mode prevention switch. That's nice of them. Okay. At any rate, so what you're going to do is you're going to dial in your shutter speed and aperture. Shutter speed with this ring, aperture with the red lever right here. And then you're going to focus as we just discussed, take your picture, and advance. To the best of my knowledge, there is no ability to do a double exposure on this camera without risking damage to it. I would not risk doing a double exposure with this camera. I think that would be a really good way to damage the mechanism. A lot of the old rangefinders were designed not to allow double exposures. So if it is possible, you would have to do it with the hold down the film, rewind, release button, the film knob, advance the film, and then do the double exposure again. But like I said, this is not... Tarons are well built on the exterior. They always have a couple of mechanical issues on the inside that are just like ticking time bombs. So if you have one of these that's in working condition, I would strongly recommend just appreciating it as a camera that is in working condition and not trying to tax it too much. And then some things not to do with your camera. Don't store it in a plastic bag or box because that's a good way for fungus to grow on it. Plastic is permeable and water will get through it, and that can cause fungus to grow on your lens optics or mildew to grow in the leather, which will degrade your optical performance and also be stinky when you slap it up to your nose. Don't leave it on your car seat. It is a camera. Car thieves are not picky, so if you leave it there overnight, or even just to run into the gas station to pick up, some beef jerky after a hike or something like that, it's distinctly possible you will come back to it. Well, in the right neighborhood, it is distinctly possible you will come back to a broken window and no camera. So just be mindful of that. And I always recommend, if you have camera gear with you, take it with you, even if you just pop in very quickly to a store. So another thing is, always trigger your shutter before you store your camera, because these are mechanical and they have springs inside of them. They're all clockwork. So if you leave the shutter armed for a long time, there is tension on the springs in the shutter mechanism. And over time that can weaken those springs, which can throw off your shutter timing or cause those springs to break and make your shutter do this, which is nothing whatsoever when you push the shutter button. And just remember, your Taron Vic is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.